So what's one of the key lessons about fraud you learned on day one?
This is the $1,000,000 question. It is important just always to look at the positives and make sure you understand what had happened and how to improve it moving forward. I find it scary, but also not too scary because there is a limit to what you can do with AI. I still think that AI is not that smart. It's only as smart as the person that uses it. And fraudsters don't have those operational limitations. I would say as a prevention provider, it starts with research. If you understand what good user behavior looks like, you can identify anomalies and actually catch fraud better. But fraudsters are definitely constantly taking advantage of loopholes that we have.
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by Technologist. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show we have Doriel Abrahams is the principal technologist at Forta, where he provides industry insights and risk intel to digital commerce leaders, so they can adapt and stay ahead of what's to come. With over a decade of hands-on experience using AI to monitor emerging fraud trends, attacker MOs, and advanced technologies, Doriel brings a unique perspective to addressing merchants' most complex challenges. Let's dive in. Welcome, Doriel, to Tech Dogs Disco Dialogues podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thanks, Nicky. It's great to be here.
So before we go into the main conversation, Doriel, I would like to ask you, because you run this episodes yourself, what's the fraud, right? I really love the name, and what inspired you to start the show?
Well, I think I found during my time in the industry that a lot of people are curious to hear what's happening out there. I think a lot of different industries experiencing similar things. So I thought if I could just talk about things I'm seeing, maybe it would resonate with a lot of people who are in the industry, and so far it's been pretty successful. So it's great.
I really appreciate the initiative. It's a great help that you're doing, creating awareness about frauds to the right audience and helping them stay secure from frauds and all. And I also, when I see at your profile, right, you like born in Tel Aviv and now you're in New York. So are you in New York by choice or by faith? And do you miss Tel Aviv?
That is a great question. I was brought up in Israel, where it's very different from New York. I moved to New York for work mostly, but I found a nice place and I have a family here now. So it feels like this is life. I do miss Israel and Tel Aviv sometimes, but I go visit, so it's great.
That's really nice that you're enjoying New York. Home is where your heart is. And before we dive into the future of fraud tech, right? So I want to rewind a little. And your journey with Forta spans almost a decade, right? And that's pretty rare to see in today's fast-moving tech world, right? So I just wanted to know what kept you so invested in the mission of fraud prevention all these years.
That's a great question. I joined Forta, like I said, 2015, almost 10 years ago. And what I found is first a company that has a very good solution that solves an actual problem. And it's great to work at a place where I know that we're doing something that I consider as a good thing. We fight fraudsters. We make sure that people that are genuinely bad are not able to do bad things. And what also kept me here is the fact that fraud is constantly changing. So it's always a nice challenge, and it's just fun to see how fraudsters continue to innovate themselves and try to use different tactics and different methods to attack and steal from merchants, and that challenge kind of kept me here through the year. And of course, I was fortunate enough to have a very interesting path from an actual analyst through head of risk and now doing more evangelism on what fraud is, and has kept me very happy with what I do.
So what's one of the key lessons about fraud you learned on day one, and that's still true today, and no matter how tech has been evolved?
I think the first lesson I learned is that you never know what to expect. I think a lot of jobs. It's more or less the same every day. I'm not saying it in any bad way, but the same processes, the same things you're dealing with. Where fraud, you have to think outside of the box. You have to try and understand what you're really seeing. And of course, I was fortunate to work for a company with strong leadership who always, tried to find new ways to do our job better, and offered me a lot of different opportunities within the companies. Yeah.
So it's clear that your personal experience deeply shape your perspective. And speaking of evolving perspectives, let's shift gears a bit. Technology, driving fraud prevention has drastically evolved over the past decade too, right? And especially with AI becoming a central player, businesses are exploring opportunities, can they integrate AI into their processes so then they can automate fraud detection, into their processes. So I just wanted to know, what role is AI really playing today in identifying fraud in real time, and how far can it really go?
So it's an interesting question. I think AI today is generally looked at through the lens of generative AI. Write software without knowing code, or draw images without knowing how to paint, or all those things, which is great. Further is actually learning AI from day one. When you think about it, AI is a tool that can help us automate and scale up all sorts of tasks. If you're thinking about it, really, fraud prevention is statistics mostly, and using AI, we're able to automate a lot of the calculation and teach our models to think like people, like us fraud analysts. In that way, AI has been instrumental in Forge's success, and we've always thought that the best way to achieve the best performance was to leverage high-end, artificial intelligence models that could help us make decisions on transactions, with the same accuracy as a skilled person or skilled expert would do.
And so, because when we're trying to integrate AI, right, one of the biggest challenges that the businesses are facing at the moment are probably the false positives that the AI is generating, right? And because when we think about, because e-commerce and the other segments that we're dealing into, so sometimes the legitimate transactions can get flagged as a fraud, which is actually not. But in all of these, the customer experience is what probably get hampered. So how do you balance false positives with real threats? And is there any trust tax that merchants end up paying when models are too aggressive in detecting frauds?
Yeah, that's a very interesting direction, and I think it's always important for me to say that fraud, especially e-commerce transaction fraud, is always a game of balance. You always need to think about how many customers you're insulting and how many customers you're allowing to go through. The ultimate goal is stopping all fraud and allowing all legitimate people to go through. Of course, that ultimate end goal is never to be achieved, because you would always have some of false positives or false negatives, meaning fraud you allow and legitimate people you block. I think the way I see it, it's always important to leverage every single point that you can, whether it's specific data points or specific processes. There are a lot of ways that you can optimize user experience by applying specific payment strategies, and you can sometimes challenge users with some friction. When you balance all those things out, you get to a point where you really optimize the actual true positives and minimize false positives. What is important is always to look at the false positives and make sure you understand what had happened and how to improve it moving forward. Right? So we're always going to have false positives. The question is how you analyze them, consume them, and retrain whatever it is, the process you're applying or different models, to not have to reject those good users in the future.
So with Doriel, with the whole customer experience getting impacted over here, right? And with AI getting integrated into the whole, fraud detection ecosystems, right? So there will be times when, your potential customers you can lose out on in the entire process. So how can businesses try to, balance that?
I would say it depends on, we're talking about through the fraud lens, right? Because there's a lot of reasons where businesses are at risk of losing customers. And of course, fraud prevention is typically a friction point that will generate that type of churn or loss of customers. I would say first step is to be aware of it, just like I said. If people understand that this is the risk of having a bad fraud strategy or a suboptimal fraud strategy, that's a very important first step. And I would say businesses should absolutely look at the transactions that are being blocked, at traffic that's being declined, and understand if that is a tolerable amount and the people are actually being rejected for a good enough reason. So awareness would be the key, and then analyzing the data you have would be the best way to avoid that moving forward.
Definitely, I do understand, awareness is the key. And, like from business perspective, right, fraud detection often gets treated as a cost to the company, right? And something that's not necessarily considered as a growth driver. So in that case, how do you shift the conversation from fraud as a loss prevention to fraud as a customer trust enablement? How do you think decision makers or businesses start creating this change in their thought processes?
This is the $1,000,000 question, right? Because like you said, often when we look at fraud prevention, it's exactly how it's being treated. This is a cost center for the company. We're blocking traffic, we're blocking transactions. This is not how I believe it should be treated. And I think in a way, we're doing injustice to ourselves by calling us fraud fighters. We're not fighting anyone. We're trying to optimize revenue. We're trying to allow good users to have a better experience, and that is the end goal and the ultimate goal of a good strategy. I think companies that understand that and add resources to understand how they can optimize the payment process, how they can optimize the customer experience, would very easily win the next couple of years in e-commerce. If you look at it as a cost center, not a mistake. And of course, that message is hard. But if you are in front of the right leader who thinks about things in an innovative enough way, it's easy to show the value. And I would say the ROI is very key. You invest in a good fraud strategy, and that optimizes your revenue to a great amount.
Definitely, all businesses need to optimize their revenue, and while balancing risk and frauds at the same time, and also balancing customer experience at the same time. But I'll drift off the topic a little bit. Other than fraud detection, what are the other areas do you think that AI will have most prominent impact on?
That's interesting. I think the most interesting thing I can say is when you think about the other side, like the fraudsters, how they can leverage AI. Exactly. This is something that I'm dealing with, and I find it scary, but also not too scary, because there is a limit to what you can do with AI. We're seeing today people are faking documents, faking IDs. They can imitate someone else's voice. If you think about the fraud they can do or attempt to do on call centers or actual representative companies, is very scary. Also, AI helps fraudsters automate their process. So we're going to see large-scale attacks. With that, I still think that AI is not that smart. It's only as smart as the person that uses it.
Exactly.
So as long as we leverage the good things about it and we're diligent and remember what's coming, I don't think the threat is that big, but definitely we're going to see a different scale of attack.
And I completely agree to the point that you said that AI is a double-edged sword, right? Even the fraudsters are using it, even enterprises are using it to detect fraud, right? At the same time. So, what do you think? How should industries evolve? Do you think that governments need to step in over here and then lay down rules in terms of because at the end it's a technology, irrespective of you restrict it, the fraudsters are going to use it, and we are seeing it that not only in fraud but other cybersecurity attacks as well. Bad actors are using AI to deploy their threats, accomplish their frauds and all of that. But what do you think, will government placing down rules will help, or the businesses or the enterprises that are developing AI, do they have the authority to identify such people and then take action against them?
I personally think that the government should not have the ability to interfere with the technology. With that, there are some safety issues or legal issues that have to be put in place. It is important to remember that even if governments does lay some sort of regulation or something around AI, the fraudsters are anyway not listening to the regulation. So we just need to make sure that we're not tying the organizations hands behind their back with also regulations and regulations where fraudsters can do whatever they want. When you think about it, even without regulation. Fraudsters have an idea and they just go at it. Organizations have to prioritize and budget certain efforts, and if you need to develop something new, you need to ask for approval from R&D, from marketing, and from finance or whatever. And fraudsters don't have those operational limitations. If you add another regulation on top of those operational limitations, you might be too late to be impactful against fraudsters. I don't have an opinion on should be reasonable regulation, yes or not, but I just think this is something that needs to be taken into account.
Definitely. And like one of the interesting factors, which I felt like, and I felt it very interesting. There's this AI bot called as Nancy, I guess, and she's been invented to kill times of the scammers and the fraudsters that call you, on all of that. And I felt that it's a really nice invention where businesses are trying to invent in terms of then identifying potential scams or frauds, and then having an AI bot in place who can detect such frauds and waste time of the scammers or the fraudsters, so that it helps us to identify and get some time to work on it and stop its impact happening on the organizations.
And that's a very important point. AI can help us do almost everything if we apply it the right way. So it helps, if you're creative enough, it can help with very different types of tasks. And of course, you don't have to invest so much manpower in doing all of them because AI can help there.
And looking at the future, right? Where do you think? And this is a question I think I should ask you because you're the right person. So looking at the future, where do you think the biggest gap lies in fraud detection right now? Is it understanding consumer behavior more deeply, adjusting the AI models, or improving how businesses view fraud from a strategic perspective? What's your take on this?
So first of all three are important. I think the biggest gap, the way I see it from talking to a lot of different merchants and e-commerce retailers over the past 10 years, I think the biggest gap is that still fraud prevention, by and large, is treated as look at the transaction and understand if the transaction is good or bad. I would say this is maybe 50% of the decision you need to make. You always need to understand who is the person that's making the transaction. When have you seen it before? What type of behavior they present? Do we think that behavior predicts something bad is going to happen after? If you're just focusing on the transaction itself, you're limiting yourself to a lot of other contexts that you might have on this user given their behavior or the way that they are openly sharing with you or openly hiding from you. It's also important to say. So to me, that is biggest challenge, but that comes together with how to leverage AI, what type of focus should be on fraud strategy by organization. So to me, it's all intertwined into one big app, and that is the transaction itself is one point in time where the user is interacting with you. So many things that are before and after, and it all should be considered when you make that one decision.
In terms of how do you think, so does the user behavior change based on region? Because you've worked across a global scale, I believe. So does the the anomalies or user frauds change by region to region? And how do companies identify the patterns based on region, and what strategies they can implement to overcome or minimize the fraud?
Sure. So first of all, the user behavior changes from region to region with good users. Well, for example, Southeast Asia have about 300 different alternative payment methods. Every country has a different app. People in South Korea use one thing. People in Vietnam use the other thing. None of it is credit. It's wallets on the phone. This is a behavior because of the region. Of course, it means that fraud is going to look different in that region. In Europe, people are very susceptible to 3DS check, right? It's regulated there. You have to answer a challenge almost whenever you're making an online transaction. So good users are used to it in Europe. And of course, fraudsters are trying to take advantage of that in different ways. In the US, people really don't like being challenged. If you run a 3DS test, you're going to have almost 30% abandonment rate. So what I'm trying to get at is that good user behavior changes because of different things. It's either regulation or cultural habits or the way you interact with money or with purchases in that region. Fraudsters know that and definitely try to take advantage of that when they perform whatever it is. I would say as a prevention provider, it starts with research. If you understand what good user behavior looks like, you can identify anomalies and potentially catch fraud better. But it's not a good idea to apply the same models on different regions because there are many different behaviors there.
I mean, I do understand, and it's really important to understand, like the user behavior, and based on the region, because we are at a global scale and a global economy at the moment, and like identifying user behaviors based on region and integrating strategies will help businesses to minimize frauds across the globe. So my next question to you would be, because the tech is also evolving and fraud is also evolving at a rapid scale. And the report shared to us, it said that by 2029, right, 1 trillion card transactions are going to happen. Tech evolving at a rapid scale, with fraud moving faster than ever. How do you decide what to fix, what to automate, and what to completely reimagine?
That's a great question. Look, fraudsters will always evolve because if there's something in the world, fraudsters will try to steal it and will try to do something. And it's very important to have alignment, I would say, across the board. So if you have some sort of a marketing initiative, just make sure you understand, speak to your risk team, make sure you understand what the risks are there. If you have a new type of offering, if it's an alternative payment method, or you're allowing people to return things easier, all of those things come with risk. If you're doing the pre-work, pre-research on what types of risk, you're already halfway. And I think this is very, very important. When you make those decisions, you are knowingly or unknowingly changing how users interact with your platform. It's very important to understand what that change looks like. Again, it will change fraud as well. It's important to constantly monitor everything you're seeing, especially with high growth. Make sure that you're actually capturing good revenue and not allowing a lot of fraudsters in.
Again, steering off the topic, so what do you think? What are the most common types of frauds that you've seen that today businesses are witnessing, and what is the best strategy do you think that they need to integrate to minimize such frauds?
So the the worst fraud, or like the smartest fraudsters I've seen are ones that understand your business deeply. Mm-hmm. And they understand good enough the loopholes. For example, if I can make a booking with a travel merchant, and then if I cancel that booking and I get credits for that booking, I can then go and resell those credits without having to worry about it. Someone else has their credit card. So this is the loophole where fraudsters understand the advantage of leveraging support, canceling orders, getting credits instead of refunds. There are a lot of businesses where triangulation frauds are happening. Well, someone is stealing from you, and another person is buying from them, and you don't really have a good track of what's happening when. Mm-hmm. So the fraudsters are definitely constantly taking advantage of loopholes that we have, and that's based on the process we have, based on operational constraints we have. Fraudsters understand that. If we know that there's an issue in our flow and we're just turning a blind eye, so whatever, we'll figure it out sometime. Fraudsters would understand that. They get started with having a broad conversation internally. Like I said, if you want to change the way people can get refunds, or change the way people can return goods, or change how quickly they get the refund, make sure the fraud team knows about it, because that will definitely change fraudster behavior. Mm-hmm. And then it's easier for them to pick up on something when it changes. The problem is that in most cases, someone is making a decision on a flow chain, and then risk teams might monitor and see a weird behavior, and they won't understand what's driving it because they don't know that something was changed on a marketing perspective, or they're targeting new regions, or they're offering new payment methods, whatever it is. And then you lose a lot of time because the investigation has to include what happened internally to change behavior. Mm-hmm. If you know that in advance, you shorten the time frame from problem to solution.
Definitely. And as you said about identifying the frauds, right? So because and the earlier you identify fraud, the better would be for organizations to minimize the impact, right? So what do you think will help businesses to identify frauds in the very initial stages before even it gets a big ruckus for them. So what do you think should be the strategies or tools in place to identify frauds before it becomes worse?
I mean, I have an easy answer, and that is automation. There are a lot of things that can happen automatically, save a lot of manual work, and the emphasis should be on monitoring and alerting to identify what is an unusual event that should trigger an alert is more important than to find, one by one the transactions and identify what's fraudulent or what's not. So you can automate a lot of the things that today is focus for a lot of anti-fraud teams. You can take the heavy load and make them more strategic players that try to identify anomalies rather than not specific fraud cases. So if I was a leader of an e-commerce team or with a retailer or travel agent or hotel, whatever, I would focus on allowing my team to have tools that help automate busy work and make them strategic partners of the business rather than working bees, if that makes sense.
And like we spoke about how to identify fraud, right? But we are in a age where it cannot be completely avoided, right? Despite you have a 100% plan, you have tech in place, you have processes in place, you have people in place to identify the frauds, but there will be loopholes or silos in the entire process over here wherein the frauds can slip into the system still, right? So any best strategies do you have to detect fraud and then try to minimize its impact, like the post fraud detection scenarios? And how do you?
So, like I said at the beginning, it's always about the balance. Yes, we can never expect a zero fraud world. We can always we're making life harder for the fraudster and easier for the good user, and that's the balance we need to strive to. Sometimes, if you understand what's an expected behavior of your customers, you can very quickly understand when something unexpected happens. This is where AI comes into place. If you are able to leverage AI and define what is an anomaly, what's something that is weird enough for us to look at and understand if there's a big fraud or a small fraud or just a fluke, that is the investment I would have made. Yes, you will see chargebacks coming in. Sometimes the chargeback is when someone reports fraud. You will see some people behave differently. You will see maybe where stuff transactions one by one, but that it's not enough to catch big things in time. So invest in an automated program that fleshes out anomalies rather than find specific fraud.
So, Doriel, like as we said, we always talk about strategy, we talk about innovation, we have technologies in place, we have processes in place, and all of that. So, to ensure that, our processes and technologies are working, I feel organizations need to have some KPIs in place to identify whether our strategy and technology is working in the right direction, right? So in terms of fraud detection, what do you think the KPIs should be kept by the organizations to identify the strategies are in place and they're going in the right direction?
So the classic ones would be the approval rate and the chargeback rate, that's the fraud rate. So those are easy to monitor, and you can always say that if you're approving more and have less chargebacks, that's always good and means that you're minimizing your false positives. I will also add, you want to understand the insult rate. You will typically measure that by customer complaints. So this is something that's very important to monitor, especially if you're changing the anti-fraud program you have. Maybe you're onboarding a new vendor or you're trying something else. You most likely will see an increase or decrease in customer complaints. And that is very important to monitor. And then, of course, I would always measure time to decision. So if you don't have an automated tool that makes decisions, try and understand how long, on average, it takes before a transaction gets a decision, because that is a big indication of customer frustrations. Sometimes people might make a purchase and get a decision only a day after. That can be extremely frustrating for the user, and you want to make sure that no one gets a frustrating experience when they're purchasing. I would say these 4 typically would give you a good enough understanding if you're headed in the right direction.
Just to conclude of all the four segments we have till now. So like, because fraud is evolving, tech is also evolving. Where do you see, like, how do you see fraud evolving in next 5 to 10 years, and how do you think like, where will it evolve, and what tech will these guys use to make their strategy or the vector attacks, let's say, for that matter, so that businesses do not attend, or how will it evolve?
So I think fraudsters understand that the new generation of fraud prevention really looks at their behavior and try to understand what they do online. And I'm already seeing dark web fraudsters who are saying you need to make sure you behave like a normal person, use the VPN that's legitimate, spend time on the site before you're trying to steal something. So they understand how us, fraud prevention softwares, work and evaluate their behavior. So I say we need to expect them to understand more and more about what we do. I also think they understand that the mixed experiences, digital versus physical, is something that has an inherent loophole in it. So someone can order something online and then return it in store, or leverage some form of a mixed experience, maybe at the pickup store, and then they can somehow steal goods, like leverage returns and refunds, as I said. So those are high focus. I would say the more you can make people action online, you have more understanding who they are and what they're trying to do. So I definitely see stores are starting to have like an option to pay on your phone when you install, whether it's paid by link or you can scan the item with your smartphone and check out online. These things would help fraud prevention technologies to make decisions on those mixed virtual digital experiences. So that's kind of how I see the next couple of years.
So I see that, like, I mean, you're suggesting that businesses need to have phygital stores, like physical and digital integrated, so that, you can identify at what stage the customer is at what, like, during his customer life cycle, and what all touch points has he based on, whether it's online, digital. And when you integrate both the systems, you'll identify whether, whether he's made purchase online and, he's returning into the store. So it gets a unified system, and then business will be able to identify, okay, this is probably a potential fraud, and we need to stop it at the right
when
time.
People jump from physical to digital, you lose track of them. So if we can somehow have a unified program, like you said, that will help us keep track of them.
This part of the podcast, where we have some quick, fun questions your way. That's the rapid fire section that we are moving into. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
It's one of the fun segments which we have, right?
Yeah. Good.
One tech buzzword you secretly like, and you would be happy to never hear it again.
So what I secretly like, I mean, AI was a buzzword. Everybody talks about it, and you're already tired of saying. But I actually think it's pretty cool that we got to the point where you can leverage artificial intelligence. And one that I would be okay never hearing again is the term. It's from my industry, specifically tech, but it's fraud fighters. Like I said, I'm not fighting anyone. I'm trying to optimize customer experience and make sure that we help organization optimize revenue. I don't like the word fighters.
So, if you weren't solving fraud at Fodder today, what would you would be doing in an alternate universe, let's say, or realistically?
Realistic. So, in university, I did a degree in biology and linguistics. And it was very interesting, and I kind of think that I might have had something to do with that, maybe around biology. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, linguistics is one of my area of interest as well, learning new languages, the cultures, and getting down into the history of, where the languages originated and all of that. I find it quite fascinating, and I wish, whatever I'm not doing.
And when I studied, it was more even how language is ingrained in your actual physical brain. That was very interesting for me. So
That's true. So what's a job you admire, but you never want to do it yourself?
I would probably think like being a teacher is something that I would never be able to do with the people who do it and are good at it. That's the future of the world. That's super important.
True, I do agree with you. Teachers are the future. They shape the future generations. And if you're good at teaching, hands down to them, for the job they do.
Yeah, yeah. I would never be able to do it, but some people should.
Same, I've expected it to do it so many times, but I always come down to a solution that no, will not be able to do justice to that job. So, what's harder, catching fraudsters or finding a good Wi-Fi connection during travel?
That's a good question. Look, I think I try to look at finding Wi-Fi the same as I do on finding fraud. I just always want to make sure that I have a plan B. So I have a good enough cell phone program that if I don't have Wi-Fi, I can just use a hotspot. Same with fraud. So it's only as hard as you make it. If you're ready for it, it's crazy.
So, and because you work in the fraud detection sector, right? So, would you call yourself as a Batman who's always prepared for everything, or would you, consider yourself as the Iron Man who builds on the fly?
I think it is a kind of a combination, but if I had to choose, I would say Iron Man, because fraud constantly changes and you need to constantly change with it. And Iron Man is way cooler than Batman. That's my personal.
True, I agree, because because fraudsters are also evolving. If they are evolving, you will have to build on when you're flying, because you cannot be prepared always for all kind of scenarios with tech evolving at such a rapid scale.
Exactly.
So if you had a free day with no work, how do you think you would have spent it? Like, what's an ideal day?
Oh, that's easy. I have a 20-month-old baby, a lovely wife, and doing things together as a family. It's my favorite thing in the world. We do every weekend, and that's what we would probably do with every additional day off.
That's really nice. And if you were about to host podcasts, right? And other than the fraud detection, what do you think the topic you would have covered, if not fraud detection?
Also all the classic rock music, and I really enjoy hearing podcasts about music, and probably I could talk about the Beatles for like 20 days straight. So that's probably what I would do.
True, I love the Beatles. And so the next question for you would be, if you could time travel, right? Where would you go, future or the past, and why?
I feel like the future will get there, and history is so interesting. I would love for an opportunity to see what happened really, or to see what it was like, so the past. But I don't really want to plan that, and I'm okay with where I am right now.
Perfect. Now is where everything is. So And so, what's your go-to productivity hack when things get hectic?
It's something I have with me since I started working like in the distant past as a waiter in a restaurant. So if I'm stressed or if I'm relaxed, I'll have to do the same thing. So let's just leave the stress aside and try to be relaxed and try to enjoy it. So take a breath and remind yourself that, what you have to do, but you can control how you feel about it.
True. I do agree with you. Enjoy the now. Everything will get sorted.
Exactly.
One day at a time is my mantra, that I've picked up from one of my friends, and one day at a time is what I take, or one thing at a time. And then
one thing at a time.
Yeah, exactly. And so one last question for you before we end up the rapid fire. What's a piece of tech that you wish existed but hasn't yet been invented?
I always hated earphones, and then Apple came with the iPod, with the earpods, and I think that's the best technology ever. The worst part about it is that every 2 years you need to buy one. So if I could come up with a eternal AirPod, that never go bad or never disappear or whatever, that would have been my perfect tech gadget.
Thank you so much, Doriel, for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights on the future of fraud prevention. I'm sure our audience is going to take a lot of valuable insights from this episode. Do you have any parting words for our audience?
I think if I had to say something, is that fraud prevention is again looked at as something bad or tedious, but it's actually pretty fun industry. I recommend anyone who can take a look and explore a career in that. It's just a fun industry to be part of.
Thank you so much, Doriel, for being a part of this. We appreciate your time and efforts you've put.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.